Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Rob Schutz of Snag.com. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cameron.
Yeah, so I'd like to kick things off with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Just diving right in,
Right
pretending
in.
for the good stuff. So I grew up in Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C., repping Burke, Virginia.
Mm,
Uh, I grew up there. I have an older brother. Parents worked. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for many years. My dad worked for IBM way back in the
mm,
day. Um, Grew up there in high school, then up to Penn State for college,
mm.
found my way up to New York City, following my now wife,
Wow,
after a journey in the DC area.
love it. So what led you to go to Penn State? What did you study, and what were some of your aspirations at that time?
Oh, so many aspirations. So we're a Penn State family.
Got it.
My parents both went to Penn State. My brother went to Penn State. I looked at a bunch of different colleges, determined to not go to Penn State, and then just realized I should probably go there because it had everything I wanted, which was a good football team, good business school, and a good marching band.
Yeah.
So my initial aspiration was to just make the blue band, marching blue band, and really get into as much in terms of extracurriculars at Penn State as possible, and
Yeah.
successful. So check that off the list.
Love it. Post-graduation, then, I mean, your career it's really impressive. Right off the bat, though, you kind of get into the healthcare space, I saw, as consulting. Is that correct? How you kicked off right after graduation?
Yeah, I wound up back in DC, not necessarily by design, but I wound up working for a company called CGI,
Hmm.
uh, essentially going around and helping hospitals go paperless.
Ah,
So there was kind of the big push around EMRs, electronic medical records, and all the new records were created electronically, but there was so much paper.
mm,
So this group, we would go around and kind of help install the systems and then help scan, millions, tens of millions of records into
mm,
systems, which was interesting initially, and then got a little bit less interesting as time went on. And
mm.
so spent about 5 years doing that before kind of kicked off some of my more entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah, talking on that transition there. I mean, your first company I saw what's the deal? Is it, can
Yeah, what's the deal?
yeah, I'd love to dive into that. I know, I mean, your whole career is based off of e-com and like tech, from what I saw. So if you dive into that transition, what's the inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I have been at doing the healthcare consulting thing for about 5 years,
Yep.
and was getting a bit antsy and wanted to do something a bit more entrepreneurial. And that was right around the time that Groupon was coming out. And
Mm,
I saw that concept and it felt like something that I could do. Right? It's not all that complicated. Go talk to a restaurant or a spa and get them to give you a half price discount. Um,
yeah.
and so I worked with my buddy from Penn State and he built the back end, and I would then just kind of go roam around Washington, D.C., talking to spa owners and restaurant owners, etc.
Mm,
Uh, and a lot of that was timing. We launched the same week as a bigger competitor, Living Social,
mm,
and things just got really crazy hot in that space. I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I'd come from like consulting background. I knew like, hey, I can build an email list and I can sell these half price deals, but I didn't really know much about like building a proper business at that point
yeah.
in time. So it was a good, really good learning experience, and I got the good fortune of being part of this daily deal space that got extremely hot over a short period of time.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, staying on that topic for a little bit longer, what does the business model look like for something like that, where you're cultivating like discount codes and deals?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what the model used to look like.
Yeah.
It was essentially group buying power, right? So, hey, if we can get 100 people to buy a gift certificate, the restaurant will give everyone $50, and you only have to pay $25 to get it. So basically paying half price in that sense. And the benefit to the consumer is you're getting a discount. The benefit to the business is, hey, we're bringing 100 net new customers to try out the restaurant. Hopefully they come back.
Yep.
So that was kind of the initial model. And then as more and more people came into the space and it got more and more crowded, there was a lot of attempted differentiation and evolution of that model.
Mm. I saw, I mean, exiting here, then you get into Bark, which I saw 7th employee, first marketing employee. But I mean, first of all, how does that opportunity arise? Coming off your own venture and then going back into like this new D2C space.
Yeah. Well, I had the good fortune of to close the loop on the deals piece. Everything kind of came to a head. Groupon filed to go public. Things were very hot, and I decided at the time it was likely a good opportunity to try to sell the business. And so
Mm,
I wound up selling to a competitor who's out of New York in the deal space, and was able to kind of wipe my hands clean of daily deal piece after I had my 1 year holdover. And
yeah.
so after that, I kind of worked on a bunch of different projects, spent a decent amount of time and money on stupid things that didn't work because I thought I was like a super smart entrepreneur that just knew how to build stuff.
Yep.
And then at some point, was getting ready to get married. I was like, you know what? I should probably get a job. And I wound up kind of focusing on a few different companies. Bark was one of those. And I went to a career fair back in the day, and I
Mm,
had a meeting with the founders of Bark and a few other companies, and had a really great conversation. We shared a lot of the same stupid humor, and got the really fortunate opportunity of joining the team early, just as they were kind of figuring out how do we put our foot on the gas in terms of being
mm,
able to grow the business.
yeah. I mean, opening into that door for yourself, what was that experience like? I mean, I'm curious in your time frame, being that first marketing, what were those initiatives that you brought to the table right off
Oh,
the bat?
so many initiatives. We don't have time on the pod to talk
Yeah.
initiatives, but it's really interesting because I think there was a subset of companies, Bark being one of those, where there's some growth performance minded people in place with some cash prior to performance channels really being what they are now.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting at my desk the day that Facebook ads launched in the newsfeed, and I had
Wow.
money to spend. I started playing around with them, and I said, wow, this is pretty effective. We should keep doing this.
Hmm.
Um, and so got the opportunity to be pretty early in some of these channels and learn how to do them myself. Um, and that was really exciting, and got then the opportunity to build out a team, to explore into different channels. How do we explore into, TV and into influencers and dogs on
Mm,
Instagram? So
yeah.
all sorts of like weird, funky things that you just get the opportunity to do when you're early. And so a right time, right place kind of situation.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, so being a part of an early stage startup like that, and I mean, seeing the scaling they've done, and also getting into your next venture, Row, which being a part of that founding team is incredible. To the listeners out there, if you don't mind sharing, how does this next venture? I mean, this is probably the largest one to date that you've been able to scale. On getting into Row. What was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, I mean, Row is a really and continues to be an incredibly exciting and fascinating company. I spent 5 years at Bark, and then through Bark, kind of tangentially, I wound up meeting Z and Saman, who became my two co-founders at
Yep.
Row. I'd known Saman from back in the day when he was doing some brand work for Bark, and had always kind of kept in touch with him. He's a very unique individual. He handles brand and tech, usually two different sides of the brain, but like a really unique combination. And
Yep.
he introduced me to Z. Z, had a company that went through Y Combinator. He had investor
Mm,
relationships. He knew the healthcare space really well. His dad was a very well-known doctor.
mm,
And so it actually felt like the three of us were just a really good combination of skills.
yeah.
I didn't know a lot about those other things, but I knew a lot about how to grow a business. And so the complementary skills were super important there. And then I felt good about starting a business with those guys.
Mm,
I wasn't necessarily dead set on had to be a healthcare company or had to be X type of company, but I really liked the idea of the three of us teaming up on something.
yeah.
And Z had his own personal experience with men's health and erectile dysfunction. He was willing to share his story. It felt like just a good time to take a leap of faith. There's
Mm,
never a good time for anything. It didn't
yeah.
feel, to be fair, it didn't feel like a great time at the time, but in retrospect, it was a good decision.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think really the impetus for me was the combination of skills and the complementary skills across the founding team.
Mm, that's incredible. I mean, I would love to hear. So 2017 Row launches, but just flash forward just 3 years or 4 years, 2020 when that hits. I mean, what does that do for the business of Row? I mean, I would love to hear. I mean, supply chain affected other companies, but you guys, I'm assuming a huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big benefits was it very much started to normalize this narrative around telehealth. Talking to a doctor online, is that good? Is that bad? Is that different than seeing a doctor in person, etc.? It was kind of
Yeah.
this experiment that everyone went through when no one could go anywhere for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so that really changed the conversation where people all of a sudden start to dramatically embrace healthcare online. I think we also had pretty incredible opportunities to work with the New York Department of Health to help vaccinate a bunch of folks in their homes who were
Hmm.
disabled or couldn't come to vaccination sites. So we're using our remote diagnostics team in order to do that. So there was a
Hmm.
lot of infrastructure that we had built over the first couple of years that we were able to put into practice pretty quickly once COVID hit. Um, in addition to just helping normalize that narrative
Hmm.
around, hey, seeing a doctor online is not only more convenient, but in many cases can provide a superior experience for the right
Yeah.
type of people and conditions.
For sure. Getting into just touching on Row a little bit longer, but getting into the rebrand. I mean, to the listeners out there who might not know, you guys started as Roman and then switched over to Row. What was the inspiration towards that? And then, I mean, acquiring the domain name too as well.
Yeah, well, we have plenty to talk about on the domain name side.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, we started as Roman. That was a men's health brand. We spent a lot of time, a lot of money getting people to know Roman as a men's health brand, sexual health brand. And initially, we took the tact of launching new brands for different verticals. So our second vertical is actually a smoking cessation brand called Zero. So it
Hmm.
had Row in it at the end.
Got
Then
it.
we launched a menopause brand called Rory. So it had a Row in it. So there
Hmm.
was always kind of Row as the through line. And then as we continue to expand and kind of think more about this larger digital hospital, it became clear like we needed the umbrella brand to be more forward facing. And so there
Hmm.
was a bigger push around unified site, unified domain, unified brand, etc., where it would make sense if somebody comes in for hair loss and then wants to talk about weight loss
Yeah.
versus like I'm on a men's sexual health site and now I need to go to a dermatology site, and felt much less fluid than if you walked into um, any hospital system, UHS, and they said go to the dermatology department or
Hmm.
the urology, whatever that might be. So
Yep.
the brand evolution has taken place over the course of the last, I'd say, 2 years or so. But it's really exciting. It's kind of
Hmm.
an evolution of from where we started.
Love it. Getting into snag.com. So, I mean, just that topic right there rolls right into talking about domain name authority. But what does that journey look like for you? Did you do this in conjunction with Row at the time when at the transition, or?
Yeah, I've always been a let's call it a domain name nerd, Cameron. I've always just enjoyed like getting access to these really hard to acquire assets. Like I think about domains as the original NFTs.
Yeah.
One of each of them, and you can get it, but you can actually use it to build a business. So I did that a lot for myself, and then for all of my companies, and then people would come to me. Other founder friends would come to me, and then investors would come to me.
Mm.
And it's something that I never really had like a ton of time for when I was full time, on
Yep.
the business. But when I rolled off about 18 months ago, uh, this is one area that I kind of decided I was going to let myself nerd out on a bit more and spend more time on. And so kind of put the snag site up, started putting the word out that I was open for business on that type of stuff. And the reaction has been pretty fantastic.
Love it. So, just to listeners out there, what does like searching for that premium domain? What is a premium domain for a brand? What does that mean?
It's we deal with all sorts of domains. So a lot of it could be a premium like oneword.dictionary.com, but in a lot of cases, it's just there's a business that's been created, and it might be two words. It might be have a get or a try prefix in front of it. But they want to get access to this asset.
Mm.
So people will generally come to me. It could be before they launch the company. It could be as they're raising a seed round. It could be a Series C company that's
Mm.
now doing TV and wants to go out and get the .com. But the challenge in a lot of cases is it's very confusing to navigate and figure out, who do I even talk to? You can
Yeah.
go to GoDaddy and you can register a domain if it's available, but all good domain names are taken.
Mm,
So how do I actually find somebody that owns this? How do I get in contact? How do I make an offer, negotiate, how do I transfer the domain? So it's a relatively opaque and complex process.
yep.
But I love, for whatever reason, my brain is wired in a way where I just love being able to help people get access to that and
Mm,
like see the website flip over to the new domain. It gives me
mm,
like a real dopamine hit. So
yeah.
all sorts of different types of engagements. It could be somebody's looking for that specific domain. I work with a lot of earlier stage companies that are actually going through naming and branding exercises, but they want to understand like what domains are even gettable.
Mm,
They don't want to go through and pick a nice premium name and then figure out the only domain name they could get is like, you know, tryx.io. And they're like, well,
yeah.
that's not really what I thought of when we picked this name. So
Yep.
really across the spectrum.
Interesting. So, I mean, you've had a lot of impressive domains acquired, which we'll link in this description. But what about if someone has a domain already acquired that you're trying to get for a brand or a person or a client? What does that process look like, and actually being able to acquire that from another person?
Yeah. I mean, each scenario is different. Each domain owner is different. You can kind of go through your own journey with them. But a lot of times, the process is heavily rooted in research. Like
Mm,
much of what I do is research and outreach and
yep.
trying to honestly figure out and put these breadcrumbs together across the internet to say, it's probably this person that owns it. How do we get in contact?
Mm,
So once you get through that process and you've confirmed this person owns the domain and they actually respond to you, that's probably like 60 to 70% of the way there. Then
yep.
you're at the point where you're saying like, hey, this is like what an offer looks like. When you think about that, they might come back and say, I'm actually looking for X, or it's not for sale. There's all sorts of different strategies you can use and conversations you can have to try and see if you can pry the name loose. I
Mm,
think something I take personal pride in is like, I try to really build a relationship with both the buyer and the seller and
yep.
understand like, hey, you might not be using the website, but I see you're using the email. Like you've been
Mm,
using email for a while. I'll help you migrate the email. I'll help you migrate the email. We can also forward your email address for, 6 months, 12 months, etc. So there's no loss of continuity.
yep.
Uh, but I try and really be a partner to both and see if we can find something that works for everybody.
Yeah, love it. If you don't mind, touch on a story I was reading about as well with, I mean, some of the convincing mechanisms you might use as well, which we talk about a well, like for a charity in Brazil to acquire a name. Can you touch on that story as well?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, as I alluded to, each domain owner is kind of its own journey, right? And so there's some, like in this example, I reached out to someone who had a digital asset and they were not really interested in money. They're like, I'm, I, I don't need, I'm post-economic. I don't really need cash. And so I'm going to pass on this. And
Mm.
so I went down the rabbit hole, as it's where I spent a lot of my time in rabbit holes. I'm so dirty. Um, and I realized that this guy was actually the chair of a board of a charity
Mm.
that built water wells for small villages in Senegal and Brazil. And so I kind of came back to him and I said, hey, what if instead of cash, what if we actually sponsor building a well in Brazil and we do it through the foundation? And he was really interested in that. He said, if you can put that together and you want to kind of take on that burden, like we could just give you the asset. Uh,
Wow.
so kind of spent some time pulling together funds, figuring out logistics, etc. And it's been pretty awesome. He continues to send me pictures and updates of the well getting built down there. And
Wow.
it made my client feel really good too, because it wasn't
Yeah,
paid cash to a random person. It was like, hey, you actually help people and we wound up getting this asset. So
that's incredible.
sometimes you just got to be really creative along with persistence and figure out what motivates people, what will
Yeah.
actually get them to move.
No, for sure. Well, I know you made a space or a name in the space of in D2C at least, but what what do you see most domains that your clients are representing? Are they like e-com brands, individuals? Like, is it a wide variety? What are you finding?
Yeah, it's all over the board. It's all over the board. I think there's been a lot of AI companies that are
Mm,
coming up right now that are getting funded. So I've had a fair amount of folks coming up trying to acquire .ai TLDs, which is
yeah.
interesting. Um, I would say another swath of companies is really, I would say, industry agnostic, but people who are at that kind of Series B level, and maybe they want to upgrade in order to kind of show more legitimacy, like
Yeah.
build reputation legitimacy. And that is something I agree with. The price has to be right. You can't put your runway in danger. But I think like having the oneword.com or having the short.com definitely feels more reputable, right? It's
Mm,
kind of like when you see a brand on TV or on the subway in New York, it's like, oh, there's an ante you pay, there's a price you pay in order to acquire an asset like that. And the
yeah.
assumption that comes along with that, I think, in most consumers' minds is, well, then that is like a real company, versus
Mm,
a fly by night,
yeah.
somebody who has a 20 word .com type of thing. So it can make sense for the right types of companies, but I actually caution earlier stage companies to not bite the bullet so early
Mm,
and to make sure the unit economics work, make sure you have traction. I think there are only a handful of cases where buying the domain before you launch really makes sense
mm,
versus now you're in the hole. You spent a fair amount of money just to get this domain. Who knows if the business works? Like,
yeah.
might wind up with a beautiful brand and a beautiful domain and be fully bankrupt.
Yeah.
So it is that balance between like
Mm,
runway and I talk about like earning the right to make these types of investments.
yeah, for sure. Is there maybe a major milestone you might be able to reflect on? I mean, outside of the well, but maybe a one you're proud of acquiring, or like maybe a story that's pretty bizarre that took some time that you can reflect on.
Yeah, it's interesting. You wind up meeting a lot of people working on this type of work. You wind up working with people all across the world. And there's one story I remember. Is a not even a domain that's all that competitive or interesting, but I wound up tracking down a guy who lived in China and uh, had to get invited to join WeChat in order to speak with
Mm,
him. But we texted for months, and it was just like almost every day. And I would just check in, how you doing? Like, let's work on this deal. We finally agreed to a deal, and because of there was an issue where he changed some of his contact information, and when you change your contact information, usually there's a lock on being able to transfer the domain for 90 days. So we
uh,
agreed to a deal, but we had to wait 90 days, and I would just text him every day or two to check in, see how he's doing, make sure we didn't lose the deal. But we
yeah.
became pretty good friends, and so it's just interesting how sometimes these deals lead you down a path of meeting new people in different countries.
Mm.
I'm very well versed in using Google Translate right now. I probably have like 10 different languages that I'm negotiating with people in.
Yeah, I love it. Well, as we wrap up the episode, I'd like to touch on if there's one piece of advice you can share with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way. What would you say that would be?
I mean, regrets would have to be a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that I think I'll give you two things. I
Mhm.
know I alluded to it earlier, but I think back to when I was contemplating joining Bark.
Mm.
Uh, I'm sorry, contemplating leaving Bark to go to Row.
Yeah.
And there was a lot going on in my life. We just bought a house in New Jersey. We were having our second kid. I was
Mm.
about to have a 3 month paid sabbatical. And I remember talking with my wife, and I was like, this doesn't feel like the right time. And she gave me good advice. Basically like, are you going to look back and regret not doing this? And I was like,
Mm.
I think I will. Um, but I've come to realize there's no good time to do anything. There's never a perfect time to start a business or to
Yep.
make a big life change. Or like, if you try to match these things up in a perfect way, you're never going to do anything.
Mm.
And you're never going to take any big risks. So I think that's definitely a good one. There's never a good time to do anything.
Mm.
And then I think something that I've tried to take to heart is when thinking about business ideas or trying to figure out things to work on, the best ways to do that or come up with the ideas is to really look at what's going on in your own life. Find problems. Find problems that you see around you, write them down, have a problem notebook,
Mm,
and see if you can find or dream up ways where you could help with that problem through a business. I think that builds more personal connection to the actual problem and solution, and generally just makes it more meaningful for you if it's
mm.
something you're currently experiencing. So, say, look around you, understand what's going on, understand where there are problems and opportunities, and see if you can build on top of that.
Love it. Incredible. Well, Rob, thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, be sure to check out Snagged at snagged.com.